What we want to talk about today is one of the easiest to confuse punctuation questions in college writing. One of the exciting things about emerging as a college and professional writer is you begin to use more sophisticated punctuation and sentence structuring tools like semicolons and colons. But as you use a new tool, it's easy to make mistakes with them. So we want to take a little bit of time to review the possibilities. There's the basic rule for you. A semicolon connects two independent clauses. In other words, if you have a semicolon in a sentence, you need to check and make sure that on both sides of that semicolon, you have a complete sentence, a group of words that could stand by themselves. And here you can see some examples. The gold is a subject, the blue is a verb. A subject and a verb that can stand alone as a sentence is an independent clause, and this semicolon comes between two independent clauses and is therefore correct. You want to make sure that you don't have semicolons that have a dependent clause on one side or a phrase on one side and an independent clause on the other, or the other way around. Both sides need to be sentences that could stand alone on their own. You could also do another format where you do, and you know this from our coordination lecture, where you have an independent clause, a transitional phrase following the semicolon, and another independent clause. But you still have two independent clauses. You can still verify that on each side of the semicolon there's a set of words that could be their own sentence. An independent clause with a colon at the end of it, after the clause, can introduce a list or a phrase. It's sort of a literary license to kill. You can kind of do almost anything you want after it as long as your response is in a parallel grammatical structure. So what comes after the colon is usually a rephrasing or elaboration on something in the main clause. Let's look at an example. Again, we've got the subject and verb. Notice before the colon, we have a complete sentence. So everything from I love punctuation and all its tiny joys, that is a complete sentence. I can't have less than a complete sentence in front of the colon. But once I have that complete sentence, I have a colon, and here is a classic list after a colon. Notice how the list elaborates on the tiny joys mentioned in the independent clause. Here's another list, this time more formally enumerated with a series of numbers. You can stop the video and read these examples more carefully if you want, but I want to move on to limit the time that you have to watch the video. So let's take a look at whether these examples are correct or incorrect. So take a look at that one, pause your video, and figure out whether that's being used correctly. And then after you've taken your guess, come back, and I'll be giving you an explanation. So this is correct use of a semicolon. On each side of the semicolon, you have a complete sentence. Punctuation makes is the subject verb. It brings, subject verb on the other side of the semicolon. This could have been set up as two separate sentences with a period in between. That's the standard you want to be using. Could I have made this two separate sentences? If I could have, then the semicolon is going to work. So this one is correct. Let's try another one. And again, read it over, stop the video, and see if you can decide whether that semicolon is correct or incorrect. All right, hopefully you're back. So let's take a look at it. Here's the semicolon, and what we want to make sure is that on either side of that, we have a complete sentence. And we do on the left side. That's a complete sentence. The problem, though, is on the right side. What we have here are a series of participial phrases, those ing words. Those are not complete clauses. Those are phrases. It's a list of phrases. In fact, what we need here, as you probably figured out already, is actually not a semicolon, but a colon. So this would be incorrect, mostly because what you need when you have a semicolon is independent clauses on both sides, but we have a series of phrases on one side. Let's do another one. So this time we've got a list. It looks good. The joys of punctuation are, and then we've got an enumeration of them. But go ahead and stop this, pause for a second, and make sure this is the correct use of a semicolon. Think about it, look carefully, and come back in a few seconds after you've checked it, and I'll tell you the answer. Well, in this case, while it's tempting to say this is a correct use of a semicolon, we have a problem. And correct use of a colon. We have a problem. Remember, you have to have a complete sentence before the semicolon. And if you look at that, that is not a complete sentence. Let's read it out loud. The joys of punctuation are. No, that's not going to work. We could say the joys of punctuation are the following or make some other kind of change. But right now, the joys of punctuation are, that won't work alone as a sentence. So we really want to make sure that we have a complete sentence before a colon. So let's take a look at another one. All right. Here we have another colon. Check and make sure you have a complete sentence in front of that colon. Take a minute and then restart the video for the answer. So the answer here is this one's correct because the language to the left is a complete sentence. It is a complete independent clause. Let's listen. Punctuation is the nectar of the writing gods. That could be a sentence all by itself. It doesn't need anything after it. What happens to come after the colon is language that rephrases, elaborates upon the language of the main clause. And that's, by the way, why colons are so cool. You can do really cool things with them linguistically and logically in terms of clarifying and elaborating what you're doing. It's a great tool. You just have to learn to punctuate it right. So remember the core rule. Semicolons separate independent clauses. You should be able to see a sentence on each side of your semicolon. You should be able, if you wanted to punctuate, to substitute a period for the semicolon and things would make sense. For the colon, the key is to have a complete sentence, an uninterrupted sentence on the left side of the colon, and then afterwards you can have some fun with phrases, rephrasings, and lists. Hope this little review helps clarify for you the semicolon colon rule.